Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this year's parish mission. It is great to see our community gathered this evening as we continue our devotional practices on this holy season of Lent. Tonight, we will renew our understanding on an important teaching of our faith, and that is the resurrection of our Lord Jesus. St. Paul said that if Christ did not rise from the dead, our faith is in vain. So this parish mission is part of our monthly coffee and conversations, whose contact person and coordinator is John Caliente. Please make sure that you write your email on the sheets at the back so you can get more information about our programs here in our church and in the future. And also our speaker left their contact as well if you would like to email them, write your email as well so you could receive information about the JMJ missions. And so we begin this mission with the song that we regularly sing as a community communion hymn here in our church, the Anima Christi. The words can be found on the inside back cover of the St. Michael's hymnal. I invite everyone to please stand.
Soul of Christ, sanctify me. Body of Christ, save me. Water from the side of Christ, wash me. Passion of Christ, give me strength. Hear me, Jesus, hide me in thy wounds that I may never leave thy side. From all the evil that surrounds me, defend me. And when the call of death arrives, bid me come to thee, that I may praise thee with thy saints forever. Hear me, Jesus, hide me in thy wounds, that I may never leave thy side. From all the evil that surrounds me, defend me. And when the call of death arrives, bid me come to thee, that I may praise thee with thy saints forever.
We remain standing as we begin in the sign of the cross in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Let us pray. Lord our God, we bless you. As we come together to ponder the scriptures, we ask you in your kindness to fill us with the knowledge of your will, so that pleasing you in all things, we may grow in every good work. Open our minds as we learn about the resurrection of your Son and our Lord Jesus, and teach us to receive in faith the mysteries that you continue to reveal in our midst. Through the prayers of Our Lady, the Immaculate Conception, Saint Joseph, Saint Carlo Acutis, and all our patron saints, we commend this mission night to you, our loving God. Bless our speaker, and we ask all of this through Jesus Christ, your Son, and the Holy Spirit, God forever and ever. Amen. Please be seated. And so to lead us tonight in our parish mission, we are blessed to have Mr. Dan Palmieri with us. He is the co-founder of JMJ Missions, a Catholic evangelization team from South Jersey, dedicated to spreading the gospel by all means, one soul at a time. All four members of JMJ Missions shared a powerful conversion experience as young adults that culminated in the founding of their ministry. Dan has spoken at hundreds of events to all age groups and has even become the keynote speaker of the National Maronite Catholic Youth Conference. Please join me in giving a warm parish welcome to Dan Palmieri.
I want to thank Father Lem so much for that lovely introduction, and that song was really, really good. Where did the cantor go? Oh my gosh. Sounded amazing. And of course, Paul sounded great too. I didn't know where Paul went either. I just saw him a second ago. But as Father Lem mentioned, my name is Dan Palmieri, Catholic speaker. Is this a little better? A little farther away? Okay, there we go. All right, better? There we go. Okay, Catholic speaker, co-founder of JMJ Missions. That's like Jesus, Mary, and Joseph Missions. So we're an online and in-person Catholic evangelization team dedicated to spreading the gospel to as many souls as possible, one at a time. So we have a podcast, if you listen to podcasts. We have a YouTube channel. We're all over social media. We do live events like this. We have TikTok for the young people. We got Facebook for the more mature and wiser of all of us, right? And we have Instagram for everybody else. So again, it's so nice to be here. And what an interesting topic to talk about. Perfect for a Friday in Lent, the resurrection. No, but in all seriousness, and a really, really amazing topic because, Lent is really powerful because of what it leads to. There's so much goodness and so much love and grace to be drawn if you're suffering with Christ during Lent and your soul feels more of a pop. I tell my high school students, I'm also a high school theology teacher, your soul feels more of a pop during Easter if you take Lent seriously. Your soul feels more of a pop during Christmas if you take Advent seriously. Lent's kind of like the season leading up to the championship game. You know, the championship's so important, Easter's so important because of that long season we spent grinding it out with your whatever team that you root for, you know, all the injuries, all the games, and then finally the championship comes and you win and it's a big deal. So Lent and Easter are so connected, and that's why it's nice to have a little bit of Easter joy tonight, even on a Friday in Lent. But first, I have one more thing about me. As I said, I'm also a Catholic high school theology teacher, and I also have 4 children. Their ages are 4, 3, 2, and 9 months. Yeah. The last parish I was at, the priest said, I thought you were like 22. I'm like, no 22-year-old looks as tired as I do. I get negative sleep. No, my wife gets even more negative sleep. Those scratches here are from my 9-month-olds. You know how 9-month-olds love touching your face until they claw you. So that's my situation here. I want to start off with a little story. There was a man, and he was in Africa taking a trip with a bunch of people, and he got lost with his safari group, and he ended up in the jungle by himself. And then all of a sudden, he saw a hungry lion chasing after him. He's running from this lion as fast as he can. He's going so fast that he's running for his life, but he sees the lion gaining on him, and he's losing breath. So in a last-ditch effort, he just drops to his knees and says a prayer. And he says, God, make this lion a Catholic. And that's what he says, make this lion a Catholic. And he finishes the prayer, he gets up, turns around, he sees the lion is on its knees praying. The prayer worked, the lion's Catholic. So he goes to approach the lion, and the lion says, bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts which you're about to receive. Okay. Things aren't always what they seem. Things aren't always what they seem. People thought for a long time the Shroud of Turin was a hoax, right? And just like that lion, in a bad way, we're now realizing the Shroud of Turin's probably not a hoax. It may really be, there's a lot of evidence that it may be the true burial cloth of Jesus Christ, but we'll get to that at the end. At first, I want to bring up a 1953 study by a Harvard professor named Kurt Richter. Now, this study would never be able to be done in today's day and age because of the standards we have and animal, rights and things like that. But it was able to be done back then, whether you love it or hate it. It's an interesting study. He took rats. This man, Kurt Richter, put them in a big bucket of water. And what the rats did was they swam down to investigate their surroundings, realized there was no way out, and after about 15 minutes, they all drowned. They gave up swimming, and they all drowned. Then he took a new batch of rats. He put them in this bucket, and he allowed them to swim. And right about after 15 minutes, when it looked like they were about to drown, he took them out, so he saved their life, put them on a little cloth, dried them off, and let them rest. Then he put them all back in the bucket and see how long they would swim. Any guesses how long they swam after they were rescued? A couple more minutes? 2 or 3 minutes longer than the first time, or? Oh, just 2 or 3. Okay, 2.5 days. A couple of the rats, over 2 days, because they had hope. They were rescued. They realized there was someone that was about to save them. They had hope, and they swam for over 2 days, whereas the first time they swam for 15 minutes before they drowned. What that shows is that when even just animals have hope, amazing things can happen. Amazing things. Now, they're just animals. Think about human beings and the feats you hear about, on the news, a mother lifting up a car, to save her children. Things like that. Imagine what human beings are capable of if human beings have hope. And that's what the resurrection brings. Pure hope. Because if the resurrection is real, if Jesus really resurrected from the dead the way Christians profess to believe, then we can get through anything. We are untouchable. Not even death itself can touch us if this really happened. And the early martyrs, you listen to those stories of the incredible tortures they endured and forgiving those that were torturing them. Why? Because they had hope of what was going to happen on the other side, that life lasted forever, because this guy resurrected. And then he said, if you have me in your heart and you beat death in me, then it will last forever. And they had so much trust in that. But the question is, did it really happen? Did the resurrection really happen? Because nobody wants to put their hope in a lie. Is this something that Christians made up just to feel better about life and the impending death that we all have? Or is it a real historical event? Did Jesus really do this? And I think there's so much evidence that it really is a historical event that if the whole world knew what I'm about to tell you, I feel like I can't see anyone not converting to Christianity because of the hope therein that you see if this really is a real event. So let's take it through it. Because my goal is by the end of this talk, now a lot of my talks are more motivational. This is a little more on the academic side. But my goal is by the end of this, that everyone hopefully can walk out of this room, not just hoping the resurrection is a real event, but believing fully and knowing this really happened and that grace can be applied to you as well. So let's talk about it. The resurrection of Jesus. And at the end, we'll talk about the Shroud of Turin as well. Okay, so when I was a kid, I had a major conversion experience when I was 19, by the way. I was not into my faith when I was in high school. My friends and I, my 3 best friends and I, all had a shared conversion experience in college. This is a whole other talk for maybe a different time, but we met the family of a soon-to-be saint, if you ever heard of her, a servant of God, Maria Esperanza. We met her family, and she might be made a saint one day. We had amazing experiences at our church, and it really catapulted us into this life of faith and service to the church that we never expected. But before that, when I was a typical nominal Catholic in high school, I thought when Jesus resurrected, he just hung out with them forever. He just was always with them. That's not the case. He made appearances, many of them, and they're listed in the Bible. Here we go. The first one is Mary Magdalene and the women after they discover the empty tomb. He sees them as the gardener, as they walk back from the tomb, and he knows Mary's name. Then 2 disciples walking on the road to a town called Emmaus. That's one of my favorite Bible stories, personally. You have those 2 disciples of Jesus. They're walking along. They don't believe the rumors of resurrection. They think that's not possible. And a stranger comes up and says, "What are you guys talking about?" And they said, "Are you the only person in the whole area that has not heard of Jesus of Nazareth and the stories? And we thought he was the Messiah. Now he's dead." And he says, "What kinds of stories?" And they keep talking. And as they talk, this stranger says, "Why were you so foolish to believe everything the Old Testament said about the Messiah?" And he pretty much does an Old Testament Bible study, breaking down all the predictions of how the Messiah was going to have to die and then resurrect in order to fulfill all the prophecies. And the crazy part about this story is this is such a big head nod to the Eucharist, because they go into this little hut at the end of the day. They still don't know who it is. And what does he do? He breaks the bread. And then in my mind, the second he breaks the bread, they look at each other. Oh my gosh, it's him. He's appearing to us. They look back, gone. Such a cool exit by Jesus. But why did he do that? Was it to make a really cool stage left exit? No, it wasn't. It was a cool exit, but it was the next thing they would have noticed after he disappeared is look down at the table and see the bread there. So he truly is present in the Eucharist, and his resurrected power is present in every Eucharistic host. Okay, then you have the apostles on a mountain in Galilee. They go and they tell Thomas that they saw him. Thomas will not believe. As you guys probably know, he says, I will not believe unless I see the wounds in his hands and feet. And then Jesus appears, and he says, here they are, peace be with you. And Thomas famously falls to his knees and says, my Lord and my God. Probably ends up crying his eyes out a few moments later. By the way, he does not touch Jesus' wounds. Many people think Thomas actually touches the wounds because of that famous painting. Was it Caravaggio? You guys know the painting I'm probably talking about. Yeah, that actually is not mentioned. He never touches the wounds, which is interesting. All kinds of theological points there that I can't get into, but that was Thomas. Then St. Paul says he appeared to 500 people all at once. And as Paul writes this in his letter, he says some of them are still alive. You can go ask them. So at the time he wrote his letter, some of these 500 people were still alive who said they saw Jesus appear. And then finally, Peter and 6 other disciples in Galilee. Now, I love this one because they're fishing. They see a mysterious person on the shoreline. He says, cast your net over the other side of the boat. That was the first thing that Jesus said to them when he first met them. What a cool, Jesus has personality. He's got personality, right? Almost a wink, wink, it's me. They swim, Peter swims in as fast as he can. They get there, and what's he doing? I still don't really understand this, but he's cooking them breakfast. Have fish with me. I'm sure there's a deeper theological point to that. I just think it's hilarious that he decides to actually cook them breakfast. On another appearance, he actually says, do you have anything to eat? And eats a baked fish right in front of them. Because some people were saying, he's not really alive, this is a ghost. And he literally says, here, I'm eating food right in front of you, I am not a ghost. This was a bodily, real resurrection, not a ghostly resurrection or a spiritual one like the Gnostics believe. And then the last appearance is when he ascends to heaven in front of everybody. And he gives the apostles a mission. Go out, baptize everybody in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Teach everyone what I have commanded you. And they do. And they take it seriously. And the legend says, church tradition, but I actually think this may be correct, that they went to all kinds of places, Thomas the apostle, potentially even getting to India. Okay? And then finally, I'll include this last one. This is not a traditional resurrection appearance, but I love to include St. Paul. And the reason is because, as you know, there's that flash of light. He was killing Christians. He hears the voice, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? He says, who are you? I am Jesus. I'm the one you're persecuting. And by the way, Jesus does not say, Saul, why are you persecuting the Christians? Why are you persecuting my followers? He says, why are you persecuting me? But he had already ascended, which means through our baptism, through your baptism, Jesus is so close to you that he sees you and him as the exact same person. If something happens to you, he sees it as happening to him. That's how strongly he identifies with us. Oh my gosh, amazing. But now that was a spiritual appearance. But the reason I included it is because all you got to do is take one search on YouTube, and you will see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of appearances just like that people claim they see Jesus. By the way, did you know, apparently there's some surveys going on now the last few years in the Muslim world, and I'm not here to bash other religions or anything like that, but in the Muslim world, in the Middle East, apparently there are millions of Christians, new Christians that are converting. And it's not normally from Christian missionaries. I think it was might have been Pew Research, but it was a Christian magazine that did a poll of all these new converts that are happening in the Middle East. And it was something like 40% of the people converting to Christianity from Islam are saying they're doing it because of dreams and visions and spiritual encounters with Jesus, unexpected spiritual encounters with Jesus. How amazing is that? Very common today. Again, one YouTube search and you'll see all that kind of stuff. Everyone saying they're seeing Jesus, and it happened back then too to St. Paul. Okay, but how do we really know this all happened? Can we trust it? Can we trust it? Because people that are skeptics have so many reasons why they think that the resurrection couldn't have happened or didn't happen. So I'll take you through each objection, and we'll see if we can come to a conclusion, all right? Number one, people say the Gospels are not reliable. Those Gospels, they're not reliable books. You know, when I was a kid, I remember my religion teacher said something like, I took 1 year at Catholic school, and he said something like, oh, you know, the Gospels were probably written by like communities of Christians like 200 or 300 years after Jesus came. So they're just like general memories that the community kind of had, and they got exaggerated. He didn't really do miracles. He didn't really actually give us his body and blood. It was all just like community stuff 300 years later. Did you know that almost no biblical scholars still hold that position? The last 50 years, but especially 20 or 30 years, the pendulum has swung so far in biblical scholarship that they are now saying, I had a professor at Seton Hall in theology, and he said you can make a case that the Gospel of Mark was written just 10 years after Jesus' resurrection. 10, now that's a very, very, short estimation, but more like 20 or 30. He said you can make a case 10 years. How do we know that? Well, Gospels of Matthew and Mark may date to just 10 to 35 years after Christ. Most good scholars are going to date them within 10 to 50 or 60 years max, which is not 300 years. All right? How do we know this? Well, let's look at the context clues. In the Gospel of Mark, he says this. He says, when Simon the Cyrenian carries Jesus' cross, he says, by the way, he was helped by Simon the Cyrenian, the father of Rufus and Alexander. I'm sorry, Mark is talking about the most pivotal moment in human history, Jesus carrying his cross about to be crucified. It's an action-packed gospel. He doesn't put that many details in his gospel. Why the heck does he randomly decide to include that Simon the Cyrenian had kids named Rufus and Alexander? Why would he decide to put that in there? It's weird. Well, I'll be really impressed if anybody knows this. Does anybody know who we think Mark got most of his information from to write his gospel? Because Mark did not know Jesus, but he did know someone who knew Jesus really well. Does anyone know? Peter. Oh, that's fantastic. Peter. Because in the Acts of the Apostles, it says that Mark followed Peter around as a young man. So it's widely believed that Mark got most of his information from Peter himself. Okay, now where did Peter spend all his time after the resurrection? Well, most of it in Rome. It's widely also believed that Mark is writing to Christians in Rome. Most scholars will tell you his gospel is meant for Christians in the city of Rome. So it's almost like he's saying, Simon the Cyrenian, the father of Rufus and Alexander, almost like the people he's writing to, know who Rufus and Alexander are. They already know who these people are, right? Like, oh, you can go ask them yourself. They're still alive. Go ask Rufus and Alexander, their dad, helped Jesus carry his cross. Okay, is there any way we can corroborate this? Well, is there any other New Testament book written to a Roman audience besides the Gospel of Mark? Anybody? What other book in the New Testament is written to Romans? Romans, exactly. Great job. You guys are so smart. Yeah, Romans, okay? Let's see if St. Paul's letter to that same community has any references like this. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry, I'm being a little sarcastic here. St. Paul to the Romans, greet Rufus, chosen to me in the Lord. It's probably the same guy they're talking about. There's some Christian there named Rufus, maybe his brother Alexander too. They're probably Simon the Cyrenian's actual children. And if they're still alive, and this is probably only one generation, the Gospel of Mark and letter to the Romans, probably only one generation after the resurrection that it was written. So very close to the actual events. There are tons more contextual pieces of evidence that the Gospels were written much closer to Jesus' life than we thought, and so they're much more reliable. I don't have time to get into it. Let's just take St. Paul to the Corinthians. By the way, if anybody ever asks you, what do you think, or what do scholars think is the first New Testament book ever written? It's Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. We think that letter was written before the actual Gospels. Most scholars date that 40 to 55 AD. That's how quickly St. Paul wrote his letter to the Corinthians. 7 to 22 years after Jesus' resurrection? It's amazing that it was written so soon. Well, what did he say? For what I received, I pass on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures. So that's cool. That's a reference to the resurrection as low as 7 years after the event happened. But it goes even further. If you look at the Bible, this line, this whole stanza is like indented. It's like it's got its own little paragraph format going. The reason they do that is because he goes into a different form of writing, a different writing style, almost like it's a poem, like it's something that the Christians were telling each other already. This little section here was probably a very, very early creed that the first Christians were taught, most likely by the apostles themselves who had that authority. Well, when was the only time St. Paul would have had contact with the apostles who would have maybe helped people remember this creed that was going around? Just 3 to 5 years after the resurrection is when St. Paul met with the apostles and would have learned this creed when he went there to, I believe, Jerusalem. So right here we have good reason to think that this little paragraph is a reference to the resurrection of Christ from only 3 to 5 years, a handful of years after the actual event itself. So there's other things like that we can't really, that's the best explanation for that little poem, that little creed that St. Paul already knew. Okay, finally, this is really interesting. Okay, another way you can make sure that ancient documents are reliable is to look at how many copies there are. Okay, if there's a lot of ancient copies of an old text, we can cross-reference them and we can see what the originals said. Now, just as an example, Aristotle, there's probably only a few dozen ancient copies of Aristotle. I think, Plutarch's Tetralogy is really famous back then. There's only a few copies of that. Does anybody know the number one ancient document that has the most copies that we know for sure? We have really good evidence to believe we know what the original said. Does anyone know what that ancient document is? What's that? Close. You're on the right track. Hold that thought. Great job. No, good guess. Not the Torah. Homer. Anyone know Homer's? The Iliad. Homer's Iliad has like over 1,000 ancient copies. That's by far the most well-attested ancient book, single book in the world. So scholars will tell you we know pretty much down to the letter what the original Iliad said because of all of the copies we can cross-reference. There's only one set of books that has more, and that's the New Testament. Great job. How old are you? 14. Oh, you're on the right track. That's awesome. Okay. The New Testament. Anyone know how many ancient copies we have of New Testament books? Remember, 1,000 is the gold standard. That's amazing. Over 5,000. Over 5,000 ancient copies of New Testament books. It is the most reliable set of books in the world by far from a historical standpoint. From a historical, not even a faith standpoint, most reliable set of ancient books in the world. So we know almost exactly what the originals say, pretty much down to grammar, punctuation. A few uhs and thes and maybe a couple words here and there that were switched out, but word for word, pretty much, we know what they say. Okay, so how's that for reliable? Okay, the second thing, people say, well, okay, maybe the New Testament books are reliable, but maybe they lied about the tomb being empty. Maybe the tomb really wasn't empty, right? Okay, we know for a fact the tomb was definitely empty. Why? Okay, you can look at some other clues. Anyone remember who I just mentioned was the first people to see the empty tomb? Yes. Mary Magdalene and other women. Now that's a problem. Not really. This is not my opinion. Don't tell my wife I said that. Here's the problem. Back then, not today, back then, women were not seen to be reliable witnesses. They couldn't even testify by themselves in court. They were seen as emotional storytellers who just made stuff up. So if you are the apostles and you're making up the resurrection, and deep down you know this is a huge lie because they stole the body or he really didn't resurrect and he's still crucified there and still dead, and you're trying to concoct this lie, you would never ever say it was discovered by women. That would damage your case. It wouldn't help it at all. Unless it really was discovered by women and you're just telling the truth and letting the chips fall where they're going to fall. Pretty amazing. if they were lying about this, they had no reason to say that it was women unless it actually was. It's kind of like my wife saying, my 2-year-old Ben went a whole day without injuring himself or climbing on any furniture. It's just not like a very believable story unless it actually happened, Okay, so also you could say if the Pharisees were so adamant about the fact that he didn't resurrect, like the Gospels say, couldn't they just show the body? Would put this whole thing to rest. These rumors of resurrection would have never circulated because all the Pharisees would have had to do is said, here he is. Yet they couldn't do that. They couldn't show the body because it wasn't there. Okay, so their best guess is that the disciples stole it. They say, okay, you know what? The disciples came and stole the body. That's why it wasn't there, but he couldn't have resurrected. There's a lot of problems with saying that the apostles or the disciples of Jesus stole the body. Number one, there were guards there. There were Roman-trained professional guards. This means this would have had to have been an operation that the apostles planned out, like a military operation in which they're overpowering Roman guards. And there's no evidence whatsoever that guards were attacked. We have no documents from the ancient world saying that the guards in front of the tomb were attacked in any way. Also, it was a really big stone. It was like the size of a door. That's an operation. You can't just have a couple people come and overpower guards and take a stone away. This would have been a bunch of people needed to move this thing. And that's really unlikely because it's not in a secret place. Everyone knew where he was buried. He was buried like right next to where he was crucified. Has anyone ever been to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Israel? Yeah, you've been there. It's on my bucket list. I would love to go there. I couldn't believe the resurrection site and the crucifixion site were in the same church. They're really close to each other. So this was a popular guy. Jesus was the most popular person to ever be crucified. So everyone knew where he was crucified. Everybody knew where he was buried. It would have taken an absolute operation to actually pull something like that off if everyone knew where he was. The Pharisees knew where he was. The Roman soldiers knew where he was. There's no way the apostles came and overpowered the guards, moved the stone, and took it away. No way. But that is still the best anti-resurrection thesis that you can have. That makes the most logical sense. So let's go with it. Let's just say, okay, they stole the body and they lied about it. Let's just go with that. Apostles stole the body of Jesus, lied about the resurrection. What happened to 11 out of the 12 apostles in the years to follow? All of them were martyred, except St. John, and he was willing to be martyred. The tradition says he was boiled in oil, a pot of oil, just didn't die. And that freaked the Romans out, so they let him go. They banished him, right? The gods are with this guy, just let him go, right? That's what they said. If you know you're lying about something, you would never, ever go through the unspeakable tortures the apostles went through. And our tradition says 11 out of 12 were killed for it, and even the best historical evidence we have says that at least 5 or 6 of them did. We have no evidence that any of them died of old age. We just don't have many evidence at all about what happened to them except church tradition. But we do have a lot of historical evidence that at least 5 or 6, probably James the Apostle, James the Greater, Matthew, definitely Peter, Thomas, that they actually were killed for their faith. We have a lot of evidence of that. So why would you die for something you're lying about? You might say, okay, Dan, but people die for things all the time that aren't true. People die for communism all the time. True. That's a mistake. But at least if somebody is going to die for their belief in communism, even though they're misguided, they think it's right. They think they're doing what's right deep down. If the apostles stole the body, then they knew deep down they were not doing what was right. They knew deep down this whole thing was a lie. So you can't tell me that they knew it was a lie, went through unspeakable tortures, and were crucified. Some of them crucified. Nobody does that. And people say, well, those traditions, you can't believe those church traditions. They don't really happen. You know what's interesting? So many people like to say, oh, it's just a lowercase church tradition that Peter died. It's a lowercase t church tradition that Thomas died and other things. And we don't really think that actually happened. We have so much evidence that a lot of these church traditions, no proof, but a lot of evidence that these church traditions are true. They're based on real events. Let me give you an example. It was widely believed that St. Peter was buried under Vatican Hill, on Vatican Hill, and that a church, Constantine, in the ancient times, built a church over the spot that Peter was crucified upside down. You guys heard about that? Peter crucified upside down? Yeah, crucified upside down. Constantine builds a church over that burial site, and that's it. And then that's where St. Peter's Basilica sits today. But of course, the skeptics come. in the last 200 years, and they say, Peter wasn't really crucified upside down. We don't know what happened to him. He can't be buried under there. That was so long ago. Not the Apostle Peter. Well, in the 1930s, I think it was Pius the maybe 11th or 12th, commissioned a actual excavation of underneath St. Peter's Basilica. They do the excavation. They found the actual remains of that ancient church that Constantine built. They know for sure it's the church he built. They dug underneath that, and they saw an actual tomb, a crypt, and a sign, and it says, "Here lies Peter." This is Peter from 2,000 years ago. And then they found bones there, and they also found coins of every single Roman emperor from Caesar Augustus, when Jesus was born, up until Constantine built that church. Because back then there was a custom in which if there was a person you wanted to honor, you took a coin and you planted it at the spot of the burial. They have coins from every single Roman emperor, 33 AD to 300 AD. So we know for a fact there's bones here. It says this is Peter, and the ancient Christians from 33 AD or so, well, 70 AD when he was probably crucified, right? From that time period on, we have evidence that they thought it was Peter's body. And then they did a forensic analysis of the bones. They found that it was a sturdy elderly male that absolutely matches the fisherman's description of Peter. It's almost definitely Peter's real bones, still underneath St. Peter's Basilica to this day. So don't let anybody tell you, just because it's just a church tradition, that there's no evidence that it's real. There's a lot. I'll give you one more. This is amazing. This is the Apostle Thomas, where he apparently is buried, okay, over in India. Now, the church tradition said that Thomas the Apostle got all the way to India, and that when he got there, that there was an emperor named Gondophares that he worked for, and that he converted lots of people and converted the emperor, worked a bunch of miracles, and then went south, and then went to another emperor and was killed for his faith and was martyred, and started a church of people in India, around Kerala, India. That was what the church tradition always said. And it said that he got on a ship from Jerusalem, a slave ship from Jerusalem Egypt, all the way to India as a Greek carpenter, and did all these things. But of course, that was just a legend. We don't know if Thomas really got there until St. Francis Xavier and the Jesuits get to India in the 1500s. And they think they're bringing Christianity to India for the first time ever. Let's show these Indian people who Jesus is. What do they find there when they get there? They find Christians there, exactly. They said, how do you exist? We're the first people to bring Jesus here. They said, no, you're not. Thomas the Apostle came here a long time ago. We trace our lineage back to Thomas himself. That's what they told the first Jesuits that got there. They said, no, that's crazy. That's just a tradition. They said, no, he really got here. We're here. Here we are. We've been doing this for a long time. They had their own version of Mass and everything. Okay, 300 years go by. 1800s, the skeptics come again. They say, well, we don't know exactly how there were Christians there when the Jesuits got there, but they couldn't have been Thomas, because we don't have any evidence that that emperor even existed. We have no real evidence of that until archaeologists found a coin, King Gondophares inscription on it. They found that he absolutely did exist. There was a coin with his inscription. They found an ancient monument from 2,000 years ago to King Gondophares, that same king that our tradition says Thomas worked for. But they thought, well, no, he couldn't have gotten on a ship from Egypt to India. That's not possible. There's no way they could have gotten that far at that time period. Well, in the last 100 years, they found a current that goes from Egypt towards India. And they found evidence that the ancients knew about that current and used it to get from Egypt to India. And that in India 2,000 years ago, there was a demand for Greek carpenters, which is exactly what our tradition says Thomas was. Boarded the ship as a Greek carpenter, got to India. He almost definitely really did get to India. Isn't that amazing? Those Indian Christians today, they're called Syro-Malabar Catholics. They're still around today. Amazing stuff. So don't let anybody tell you those little traditions, like the resurrection or like the apostles dying for their faith, don't have any evidence. All right, well, let's keep going. You think, okay, but, this is all so spiritual. The resurrection is such a crazy thing. He says he unlocks heaven. We don't have any evidence that heaven exists. Oh, yes, we do. Has anybody ever seen the movie or read the book Heaven is for Real? Okay, old book, but really popular one. Colton Burpo, 4-year-old. said he had an NDE, or a near-death experience. He said he saw his body come out, he saw his soul come out of his body. He could say where the doctors were and the nurses were in the hospital, all kinds of things. And then apparently he said he saw Jesus, he saw John the Baptist. He apparently, the coolest thing was afterwards, the experience, he told his parents, I have a sister. And they said, what do you mean you have a sister? He said, she's older than me. She said, Mom, she said she died in your belly. She was a couple of years older than me, and she kept hugging me, and she said she couldn't wait until we all got to heaven so she could hug all of us and see us there. They never told him this, but they did have a miscarriage. She was a few years older than him, and it was a girl, right? So he had new information he couldn't know. But you know what people say? Oh, he was just making it up. He's hallucinating. When people have a near-death experience and they say they meet Jesus or angels or loved ones and they come out of their body, they're just hallucinating because there's so many chemicals firing in their brain at the point of death. Until this guy, his name is Dr. Sam Parnia. He did the first ever big, lengthy, peer-reviewed research study. It's called the AWARE study on near-death experiences. And you know what he said? He said they found at least a couple, more than that, a handful of cases in which somebody came out of their body, they described a situation, and there's absolutely no way they could have known what was happening in the hospital, and it all corroborated. They checked the cameras, they interviewed the doctors and nurses in the hospital, and found out the information they were given from someone who said they left their body was completely accurate, and they came to the assumption that they were probably not having hallucinations. New York University, from a science perspective, said because of this study, there is a, quote, very high likelihood that your consciousness, we would call that your soul, survives death. From a science perspective, because of these studies being done on near-death experiences. This guy, his name is Dr. Eben Alexander. He's a neuroscientist. He said he was an agnostic, and his idea of near-death experiences was that, again, you're just hallucinating because of all the chemicals firing in your brain. Until he had his own near-death experience and said he experienced heaven. And when he went back, when he came to his senses, he checked the records. As a neuroscientist, checked the records, checked the brain scans. There was zero brain activity at the time he had his experience. Zero. So now he devotes his entire life to explaining to people that heaven is real and that we're all connected in some deep spiritual way. Isn't that amazing? This is scientist perspective. Now, what unlocks all this? This is the resurrection. Christians have been saying, this doesn't surprise us. We've been taught about heaven for 2,000 years because our Savior died and came back from the dead, and we know this happened. And this is what unlocks all of it. Also, the resurrection, it makes logical sense, right? You need heaven, the idea that heaven exists and that you need a resurrection to unlock it, it makes sense. For example, I need one volunteer to give me your favorite food. Favorite food. I know it's a Friday in Lent. I'm really sorry. Yes, right here. What is it? Kimbap. Yeah. Now, what is that? Ah, it's a Korean sushi. Okay, cool. Very nice. So he likes kimbap. So what's your name? Okay, so can you imagine a world in which you're craving kimbap, but it doesn't exist to make you feel better? What kind of a sick, twisted world would that be? Could you imagine a world in which you're hungry and you want food, but wait a minute, food doesn't exist to actually fulfill your craving? Can you imagine that? Will that ever happen? No. Could you imagine a world in which you're thirsty and you want to drink water and it doesn't exist to make you feel better? Okay, Dan, where are you going with this? Okay, allow me to explain. How many of you guys, be honest, are infinitely, perfectly happy in life right now? Infinitely, perfectly happy. Good, you're being honest. There are no liars in this room. I know you guys are probably very happy because you have Christ in your life, so you're happier than most. But let me ask you a question. How many of you guys would like to be happier? Yeah, every hand should go up. Again, you're not offending God. He knows that you want to be happy, and I know you're all at peace because of Christ. There's a reason for this. You want to be happy because something exists, a better plane, a better, I don't want to say dimension, a better world exists out there to fulfill you, to make you feel better. Why would you want to be happier than you are now if that something doesn't exist to make you feel better? None of us like death. We all have a problem with death. It's annoying, right? We don't like facing it. We miss our loved ones when they pass away. We worry about our own death, right? Well, that's for a reason. You're not okay with that because you deep down know that in the Garden of Eden it was never supposed to be a thing. Adam and Eve were never supposed to sin. That's why death is so weird for us, right? And we don't like it. We want to avoid it. In fact, we want to overcome it. Every one of us wants to overcome death. Why would you have that desire to overcome death unless there was something on the other side to make you feel better? The fact that you have any desire is evidence that something exists to fulfill it. Can you imagine a world in which you got tired, but you couldn't sleep to feel better? No. And so we can't imagine a world in which we don't overcome death because we will. We want it so badly because it exists, heaven exists, to give us that pure happiness we're always thinking about that we want. So the fact that you want heaven to exist is actually evidence that it does. And again, what unlocks that? The resurrection. Okay, finally, the last objection that people have is that miracles don't happen. I'm telling you, they 100% do. We have so much evidence of miraculous events the last 100 years that are backed by science. It's unbelievable. Any Padre Pio fans in here? Say Padre Pio? Okay. I mean, come on, look, he's like a Jedi. Any Star Wars? Ben Kenobi? Original Ben Kenobi from the 70s. It's him. I mean, it's not, but I really think that they might have got the inspiration from him, right? Anyone know how many documented miracles St. Padre Pio did while he was alive? When they compiled them for his canonization cause, they estimated this many miracles that he did while he was alive. Anybody? 100? Good guess. Oh, hundreds. Okay, anybody else? 76? Good guess. How many? 5,000? You win. 27,000. 27,000 documented miracles while he was alive. He died in 1968. This wasn't like the 300s. This is 1968. There was a nun in Philadelphia before that Carmelite convent closed down. You know, you can speak to the nuns like through the little screen sometimes. I got to speak to one of those nuns, and I said, "Why did you become a nun, sister?" And she said, "Well, I was waiting for Mr. Right my whole life, but I always thought maybe I'm called to be a nun, and I would like to be a Carmelite, but no, I thought I was supposed to get married. But that guy didn't show up for a little while, and then I started thinking, maybe I am called to be a nun." And I went to San Giovanni Rotondo, and I got to go to St. Padre Pio in the early 60s. I met him, and I got to go to confession. And before I said a word, he told me in perfect English, he didn't speak English, he told me in perfect English, yes, you're supposed to be a nun, you're supposed to be a Carmelite, the feelings you're getting are true. And that's why she was in the Carmelite convent in Philly. You can talk to people still alive that had their hearts read in the confessional by St. Padre Pio. This is St. Bernadette of Lourdes. That's her body today. She died 150 years ago. She's an incorruptible body of a saint. There are about 200 saints that have died, and their bodies just never decomposed. Why? Well, I think it's a sign from Jesus, because what did he say? He who believes in me, even if you die, you don't really die. And these people really believed in him, and their bodies are not decomposing. This is St. John Bosco. He resurrected 2 of his boys from his orphanages from the dead. The families testified at his canonization that their child had passed away. For hours, he made the sign of the cross, and they literally came back to life. Twice. Finally, my favorite from the book of Acts, this is Eutychus. St. Paul was coming to the city of Troas. He's only going to be there one night, so he wanted to talk to the Christian community there. Now, this is St. Paul. He's a big deal. So all the Christians in Troas said, "Paul's coming. Let's go hear him talk." So they all gathered in an upper room for Paul to preach. Now, you think I can talk for a while? It says St. Paul went on and on and on. And the Bible, Acts literally says he spoke deep into the night. Now, there's a young man, probably teenager, called Eutychus sitting in the window. It's an upper room again. Now, there were no window panes back then. They were just open-air windows. So he's sitting in the window, and as Paul goes on and on about Jesus, and by the way, read one letter of Paul. It's like one big run-on sentence, right? He's so excited, he just can't stop. Eutychus starts to fade, and he falls asleep. But he falls backwards out the window. Book of Acts says he was taken up dead, probably hit his neck in some weird way, and he dies. Paul says, "Oh, well, that's not good." He stops his talk, goes downstairs, goes outside, gives him a bear hug on the ground and says, "It's okay, there's life in him," and says a long prayer. Let's go. And Eutychus literally comes back to life, resurrects him, totally fine, totally healed, and then Paul goes back up there and talks for however longer that night. Real story from the book of Acts. Resurrections do happen, miracles do happen. And last but not least, we'll talk about the Shroud of Turin. And we'll do that as quickly as I can for about 15 minutes. Now, what do we think this is? We think this could be the real, actual burial cloth of Jesus Christ, the real burial cloth of Jesus Christ. Now, we don't know for sure. The church has not said it's a definite, but we think it could be. Here's what we do know about it. It's a 14 foot 5 inch by 3 foot 7 inch linen burial cloth. We know that it definitely has an image of a Jewish man who was tortured and crucified. It's at least 800 years old, but it could be much older, and we'll get to that. Now, the origins are unknown before the 1200s. We know everywhere this thing has been, we have really good records of it up from the last 800 years. Before that, we have some oral traditions as to what families held onto the shroud, but we don't know for sure. We have no proof of where it was before 800 years ago. And that's actually one of the reasons that skeptics think it's not Jesus' burial cloth, because, again, we don't have those records before the 1200s. It still is in the city of Turin today. It's been there for hundreds of years. Okay, now here's the main reason that people do not think this is Jesus Christ's real burial cloth. There was a carbon dating study, and carbon dating is testing. Carbon dating is normally seen to be a very reliable method of testing. It's pretty good. We've been doing it for years and years and years. They carbon dated the shroud in 1988, and the carbon dating said that it was dated between 1260 and 1390 AD, which actually makes sense if it's a forgery, because we don't have a record of it before that time, and there the carbon dating says it's from that time, right? So for a long time, people said, it's definitely a medieval forgery. It's only 800 years old. And that really actually hurt a lot of people's faith. My own grandmother, God bless her, didn't talk too much to me about spiritual things growing up. But when I first had my conversion experience and I was talking to her, she says, Danny, your grandfather and I visited Turin the last time that they made the shroud visible, or maybe it was like in the mid-'80s. One of the times they made the shroud available to the public, we went, we saw it. She says, Danny, I saw the shroud. And she doesn't talk like this very often. She said, I felt something so strong in the bottom of my soul. She goes, I knew for a fact that was really Jesus' burial cloth. I knew it. We could feel it. Everybody in the room felt it. Your grandfather felt it. We felt it. And I said, oh, Mom, that's so cool. It's amazing. And then she paused and she got sad. And she said, and then they found out it was a fake. And she almost started to tear up. She said, and then they found out I was a fake. Like her faith was crushed because she felt something so special and was told all over the newspapers it's a fake. That was in 1988. And for about 8 years or so, people kind of just took the scientist's word for it. It's medieval forgery. Okay, however, in 1997, a very well-known and reputable chemist named Ray Rogers raised issues with that carbon dating test. He noticed that there is 0% vanillin in the middle of the cloth, but 37% on the edges, and vanillin takes a long time to decompose and to disappear. So what he's trying to say is that means if there's way more vanillin on the edges on the cloth than in the middle, the edges are newer than the middle, almost like it was patched. Well, do we have evidence that the shroud was ever patched on the edges? Yes, we do know that, because there's a fire that broke out, I think in the 1500s, and it's widely believed that nuns, sisters, patched the edges of the cloth that got burned in that fire. Well, where did they take that sample from? The one little tiny sample, that little chunk they carbon dated, they took it from the edges, which we know almost for a fact are newer than the center of the cloth. Why would they take it from the edges? That doesn't make any sense. I don't know who was in charge of picking the spot, but they took it from the edges. I guess the church didn't want like a piece in the middle being taken out, So that shed a lot of doubts on that carbon dating test. You tested a spot that was probably burned in a fire that throws off the carbon dating accuracy. Also, in 2018, they were able to obtain the raw data from that initial 1988 study, and they found out that the statisticians found out that they should never have published it. There was so much margin for error in that 1260 to 1390 AD that they never talked about that. They just kind of put it out to the media as a foregone conclusion. It was 800 years old, and they said they should have never published that study. They almost hinted that there might have been some foul play, because how could a reputable scientist publish something like that knowing how much margin for error there was and not really talk about it? They didn't say there was deception, but they almost hinted at it when they found that 2018 raw data. So that shed a lot of doubt on that 1988 test. Now, here's why people think it is Jesus' burial cloth. Are you ready? This is crazy. There's all kinds of unexplained phenomena happening with this object. It is one of the most mysterious and unexplained objects in the entire world. Okay, STIRP team, Shroud of Turin research project, was able to spend, in the 1970s, they were able to spend about 3 days working on the shroud round the clock. All these top scientists, 33 of them, a few were Christian, a few were Jewish, and some were atheists as well. I will tell you, it was something like 30 out of the 33 ended up becoming Christian. Those that weren't Christian, by the end of the study, 30 out of the 33 were Christians. They converted because of this cloth. They said there's so many unexplained phenomena with it, there has to be something supernatural. I gave this talk about a year ago at a church near me. A guy sitting in the front row nudged his friend. And the friend said, tell him. The friend said, what? The guy says, tell him. After the talk, the one friend said, it was like my dad, or it was like my uncle. It was someone he knew very well, was on that STIRP team, was one of the 33 scientists. I said, what did he say about it? Did he say it was Jesus' burial cloth? And he said, I asked him that, and his exact quote was, is the sun going to come up tomorrow? That's what he said. So meaning it was definitely Jesus' burial cloth in the words of one of these STIRP scientists. They said, no combination of physical, medical, chemical, or other elements could have produced this image. So if it's a forgery, you think it's got to be a drawing, right? There are no brush marks, no paint marks, there's no dye on it, there's no sketch marks. We have no idea what makes the image, because they know for a fact it was not drawn, it was not painted. So what the heck is going on here? Nobody has any clue, but they know it's not a forgery. So then what is it? They also know the original image is actually a photo negative. When an amateur photographer first photographed the shroud and the negatives were developed, what he saw was that the negatives were clearer and brighter and crisper than the positives, almost like the original image is a negative. It is the only image in the entire world that we know of that behaves this way. There's nothing else in the world where it actually, the original behaves as a photo negative. So it's amazing. No one has any idea how that is explainable either. There are traces of limestone and pollen found only in Israel on the cloth. So if it was a medieval forgery, the long-standing assumption was that some European religious zealot or some scam artist who wanted to make a buck drew this. But then how is there actual limestone and pollen only found in Israel, and specifically the area around Jerusalem on that shroud? Almost impossible. I mean, that person did their homework. That means they took that cloth all the way to Israel, put some pollen on it, right? Just in case it would be tested 700 years later, and then brought it back. No. We know it actually originates from Israel, from Jerusalem. Okay, this might be the most unknown and most amazing part about this. The image only exists on the top few fibers, like less than 1 millimeter of cloth. That's where the actual image is. The rest of the thickness of the cloth, there's nothing there. There's no marking. There's no color there whatsoever. Paint doesn't do that. Dye doesn't do that. Sketch marks don't do that. They think, well, one hypothesis was, well, maybe like the body was really hot and some kind of weird aloes and vapors mixed with the body, and that's what put the image on there. Well, that doesn't do that either. That would have bled through the entire thickness of the cloth. It's only a fraction of a percent that image is actually colored. The rest of it is completely, in the thickness, completely blank. That's impossible. We don't know anything about what could cause that. There is depth and 3D image information embedded on it. You guys can kind of see this right here. Doesn't it almost look like you can kind of see through his face a little bit? Almost looks a little 3D. Yeah, your eyes aren't playing tricks on you. There are 3D imaging embedded into it. If you look at the whole body, you can see his backbone through his body. How can you see it? It's like a hologram almost. It's like, again, 3D information embedded. They used a really cool instrument called a VP8 image analyzer, which is a machine that looks at a flat picture of the moon, and then it will generate a computer image of the topography, like the ups and downs of the moon, right? The geology of the moon, just looking at a flat image. They fed the whole body shroud, into the VP8 image analyzer, and what came out was a completely proportional human body. Completely proportional, which is unbelievable, because that means not only is there the imaging embedded into it, but it's a perfect proportion as well. Okay. So, there's more to it. I don't have time to get to it. The blood type is AB on the shroud, which is the same as all Eucharistic miracles, by the way. Another really cool thing. Okay, but what is the best guess to round this all out? What is science's best guess as to what could possibly have put this image onto the cloth? I'll give you science's 2 best guesses. Number 1, this is crazy. 6 to 8 billion watts of ultraviolet light in 1/40 billionth of a second. 6 to 8 billion watts of UV light going through the shroud in 1/40 billionth of a second. We do not have that kind of technology to do that even today. We do not have that kind of energy to put a light source that quickly and that powerful through a cloth that could imprint that even today. And here's the other guess as to what could have caused this. A low temperature nuclear reaction of the body. The body literally, in a nuclear sense, exploded, right? In a low temperature nuclear blast, a lot of light, a lot of sound, and that image, and it was so powerful that it did not tear the cloth apart, but went through it, and that's what produced the image. Now, we don't know this for sure, but this is another church tradition. Our church tradition says the Roman guards heard a loud bang and saw a bluish light at the time of the resurrection and were sworn to secrecy at pain of death. That's what some traditions say from the early times. That would corroborate this. Isn't that amazing? That's amazing. So if Jesus did resurrect, then it was some kind of loud bang, flash of light, in which his body or some light went through the cloth, and then he was just kind of sitting next to it, I guess, afterwards, and it left that image. Almost like God knew we were going to have this technology 2,000 years later and left it here to help us skeptics to believe in a time where it's hard to believe. Okay, but there's still that one last problem, the dating. Is it 800 years old or is it 2,000 years old? Well, let me take you through the last few studies on the dating of the cloth. Latest age of the studies. 2018, 3 separate studies showed about 90 AD, give or take, 70, 80 years, 100 years. That's what 3 studies in 2018 showed about it. 2022, X-ray scattering studies showed 55 to 74 AD, give or take about 50 years. And finally, this is seen to be the most reliable. There's a study called WAXIS, which is wide-angle X-ray imaging done in 2024, and that said 1st century. So all the latest studies all unanimously agree, 1st century AD, not a medieval forgery. So what's the conclusion here? Well, here's where we get into the Lenten part of things. It's a Friday in Lent. Assuming this really is Jesus' burial cloth, what does it say about him? Anyone know how many gashes there are on the shroud? Depending on who you ask, over 300 gashes in his skin on the shroud. That is what he went through for you. Over 300 deep wounds. The shroud also shows clearly a crown of thorns. The shroud also shows wounds through his hands and his feet. Now, how many of you guys were taught that he was nailed in his hands growing up? Okay? How many guys were taught that he was nailed in his wrists because that would have supported his body weight? It's both. What the angle of the wound suggests is that it was through the hands on a severe angle and out through that bone that would have held him up. So it was both. So the mystics, when they say they see Jesus nailed in his hands, they were not lying when they were seeing their visions of Jesus. And then, biologists, doctors, when they say that only this bone would have supported, they're not lying either. So through the hand, out through that bone at a very steep angle is what the shroud suggests. What else is going on here? There is you can't see it well, but there's a puncture wound in his, I think it's his right side, through his 5th and 6th ribs. It's an upward trajectory. It's a Roman elliptical spear wound. It's an elliptical wound at a trajectory that would have absolutely gone into his lung and would have caused blood and water, a water-like substance, and blood to flow out, just like the Gospels say. By the way, a forger in the medieval ages had no idea that Roman spears were elliptical. So that forger would have had to have had information from 1,000 years ago that only archaeologists have recently found out Roman spear wounds that the shroud corroborates. Finally, he has a broken nose. I know that we always hear that Jesus died for you, right? We know he was whipped. We know he was crowned with thorns. And we hear it so much that we can get numb to it. He broke his nose for you. Now people say, wait a minute, I thought he wouldn't break any bone in his body, right? Well, your nose is cartilage, it's not bone. So that prophecy still holds true. He broke his nose for you. It's how much he loves you. What else? Well, many mystics have said, Padre Pio, for example, was asked, what is the most painful part of your stigmata? He said, there's a wound on my shoulder. Christ had a shoulder wound, and it's not mentioned in the Gospels, but it's by far the most painful part of his passion that he went through, and I feel it. Many other mystics said the same thing, that Christ told them in visions that his shoulder wound was the hardest part, but it's not mentioned in the Gospels. Well, an in-depth look at the shroud, doctors will tell you, when they look at it, and experts, that I think it's his right shoulder, that there's a gigantic gash in his right shoulder. And what they think is that the cross was so heavy that at some point it dislocated his shoulder and got lodged inside of it. And it got stuck there. Yeah. And so that the shroud actually does corroborate what mystics are saying about that deep shoulder wound that he had. His knees are scuffed up. He has bloody knees. I'm not showing the whole image, but he has bloody knees. Why? Well, that would make sense because what does the gospel say? He fell 3 times, and every time he fell, it would have bloodied his knees up. So I'm not trying to make you feel bad for Jesus, but kind of a little bit, because this is what he went through for us. And what does this say? There's not one suffering you could ever go through in your life. Truly, he hasn't been through worse. He can't bring good out of it. Of course, every suffering that you can go through, you can link with Jesus' own death, his suffering on the cross, and it's like he's saying to you, I understand. Now let's suffer together. And guess what? I beat it. I beat it. Because what the resurrection shows is that flash of light happened after the bloodstains were there. The bloodstains were there first. The image was there second. And that shows the victory and that love and the goodness of God and the joy of the gospel can transcend every suffering we could possibly go through. My favorite quote of all time in the Bible is when Jesus says this: in this world you have trouble, but be brave, I have conquered the world. Thank you so much, guys. So we're going to, last mission I was at, people said, you move too much, you make me nervous. I'm sorry, I get excited. So I want to apologize for moving all over up here. But we're going to have some Eucharistic adoration a little bit. But before that, while we're setting up, I was wondering if anybody has any questions or anything they would like to share. More than happy to answer them. Yes? I believe it was his right side, yeah. Yeah, it's a reversal, yeah. It's the side that the Gospels say. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's great. Great observation. Great question. Anybody else? Yes. Juan Diego's. Yes. He's mentioning that St. Juan Diego's, it's a great observation. St. Juan Diego's tilma, in which Our Lady of Guadalupe appeared on, is only in the top few fibers. In fact, I've actually heard that it's not on there at all. It depends on what article you look at. Some say it's on the very top. Some say that there's no coloring whatsoever at all on Juan Diego's tilma. So either way, it seems like the same person's behind this. I guess we'd call him God, which is so cool. That's a great observation. Yes. The studies are saying unanimously the last 4 or 5 studies, 2,000 years old, give or take 40 or 50 years. Yeah, I believe it's still in Turin. They haven't showed it to the public in probably over a decade now, right? And normally every decade, 15 years or so, they put it out there. So if anybody's got some disposable income and you want to take a trip to Italy, maybe the next few years they'll put it back out on display. Yeah. Oh, I think that's the fold marks. I think it's the fold marks, yeah. The triangles on his ribs, and that's, I believe, when it was folded, the fold marks on the shroud. I don't think they actually belong to the image proper, if that makes any sense. Yeah. No, because we don't have Veronica's veil anymore. Yeah, that was lost in like the 1500s, apparently. Yeah, it was stolen or something like that. Yeah, I was just looked into that recently just for that same question, and I think it was like 400 or 500 years ago. Yeah, it's a darn shame. Yeah, would have been cool to compare it. Has anyone ever heard of the Sudarium of Oviedo in Spain? Yeah, there's a cloth that apparently bears Jesus that was wrapped over his head. And if you lay it down over top of the shroud, it's like almost an exact match of the blood stains and the wounds, which is really cool. But you can do your own research. I don't know enough about that to speak about that at length, but it's really neat if you look into that. Anybody else? Yes. Yeah, it was like a little over 6 foot. Yeah, which would have been really tall for back then. And he has a carpenter's build. He has a fit. He was definitely probably early 30s, like around that, in the prime of his life. And he has I wouldn't say a fit build, but definitely a build of someone who would have worked with their hands. Yeah. Over here, back there. Yeah. What's that? Why did anybody? I think what happened was the legend says, and again we don't know for sure, but the early Christians grabbed it after he resurrected, and they kept it in different families, kept it and just kept giving it down to their kids and their kids and their kids, and then when they felt that it was in jeopardy, they'd give it to somebody else and move it to a different part of the world when there was a war. And so just in case somebody were to try to destroy it, apparently for the first 1,200 years, these families kind of just, like one family had it for 300 years, then another family, and we don't know for sure, but that's what our tradition says, to keep it from being destroyed. That's a great question. Yeah. I think it's still in Turin. Yeah, Turin, Italy. Yeah. The church officially owns the shroud. Yeah, and they're really careful about it. So the studies that have been done on it, they haven't been able to actually physically handle it. Only that Stirp team in the 70s was able to physically touch it because they were so scared to mess it up. But the recent studies have been photographs of it, and they can tell, like the 2024 one that says it's 2,000 years old. It's so cool. They can actually look at a fabric, and over time the molecules stretch out. And given how stretched out the molecules are, they can tell almost down to the year how old it is. And so they did that with the shroud, and it said 2,000 years old. Yes. 33, we think. Yeah, 33. Great question. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think so. Not that I know of. And that question was asked back there. Yeah. If they've ever tried to destroy it. If anyone's ever tried to. And I think that's where the families kind of hid it. And I think maybe the Holy Spirit helped them for us today. Yeah. Yeah. Apparently it was almost destroyed a couple times, and people kind of smuggled it out as the city was about to be taken, because they knew it was one of the most important things to grab, so they would grab that and smuggle it out and then give it to a new family and hide it. So that's why they don't have good records before the 1200s, because of all the crusades going on. They don't want anyone figuring out exactly where it was, for fear that they would destroy it or try to steal it and sell it or something like that. Yeah, it's a great question. Great question. You imagine, can we just give a quick round of applause for these kids that are asking these amazing questions? They're coming from. This is awesome. I love this. As a teacher, it's so cool to see kids asking questions like this. I love it. Anybody else? Yes. Not besides the ones all the unexplained phenomena that we had mentioned. Although I do believe, now you can look this up yourself, because again, a lot of this is oral tradition, that part of the reason that people did always think it was a shroud is because miracles in the first 1,000 years did happen from people touching it, praying, healings, things like that. And that's part of the reason that people felt that it was the real cloth of Jesus. But that's oral tradition. We don't have any hard evidence of that. But the blood type, AB, which is the same blood type of every Eucharistic miracle that we find. You know how Eucharistic miracles are now being corroborated by science. Every Eucharistic miracle is blood type AB, tissue from the heart, human blood, and it matches the blood on the shroud, which is at least the same blood type, which is so interesting. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, they're out there. I think there's, I know for a fact there's a really famous statue that was made, that BP8 image analyzer that took the actual real, the actual proportional body that comes out when you feed the image to the machine. Someone sculpted an actual real life image that apparently is the actual proportion of Jesus' body, and you can go see it. I think it's in the U.S. actually. Might be in D.C., but I don't know for sure. Yeah, really neat. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes. That is a great question. The preservation process, I do not know. I do not think there is much of a preservation process, because Father Robert Spitzer said that the cloth is way more durable than it should be for something 2,000 years ago. It's kind of defies science a little bit, but the fact that it's so durable and it's lasted in such good conditions so long. And he said if a nuclear reaction really did happen to cause that image, it actually makes sense. Because if there were, I have no idea, I'm not a physicist, but this really smart priest who's done studies on the shroud said, If there was a low-grade nuclear blast and that light went through the shroud, it would have strengthened the bonds of all the atoms and molecules in the shroud and made it incredibly durable. And that's exactly what the shroud is. So they might not have much of a preservation process or need one. But you could look into that on your own, that part. Yeah. Amazing, right? Yeah. Not right now. I think that 2024 study, the Waxus one, was the last one. Because, again, only the STURP team from the 70s was able to actually physically handle it. The rest have just been photographs and things like that. Yeah. Yeah, but people are calling for a new study. With all this new information coming out, saying it's probably not a medieval forgery, they're calling for a new study. So maybe the church, maybe Pope Leo will commission that. Yes? I don't think we know. Apparently they were asleep, so I have no idea. That's what the tradition says. I do not know exactly how far those guards were. It's a great question. Great question. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, you can see too. Yep. Yep. Oh yeah, it's all over his back. Yep. Yeah, you can see, if you see the shroud, you can see both sides. Yeah, because it was like he was wrapped in it and it went through both ends. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yes, what they know is that these thorns, and it makes sense because thorns in Jerusalem, around that area, they're known as Syriac Christ thorns. They're not thorns that you see from a thorn bush outside your house. They're like thicker and longer and pointier, and they would have actually been able to fully puncture his head, and that's exactly what the wounds show. There's big puncture wounds and lots of blood, which is, I mean, it's sad, but yeah, this is, isn't it? It's endless how many cool things are coming out about the shroud. Yeah. What's that? I don't know much about the tomb. You can go, if you ever get a chance to go to Jerusalem, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, you could look at the tomb and walk in there. At least the one they think is his tomb. And I don't know much about that part. I wish I could help you out more with that. It might be a ChatGPT or a Truthly. The Catholic AI that I always recommend be Truthly, because sometimes ChatGPT just tells you what you want to hear. And not the truth, but yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, sure. One more question. Yes. Yes, you are absolutely right. She said, why? She said, you could, I mean, how can anyone not believe in this? Because you definitely can't prove it was false, because it was the Sabbath, right? So they wouldn't have gone there anyway, on Saturday, at least the day before he resurrected. And he said, Jesus being God, she said, Jesus being God, you could just roll away the tomb himself, which may have happened. The tomb may have been part of the resurrection miracle itself. Maybe a person didn't move it. It may have rolled by itself. He could have done it calmly, which would explain the guards still being asleep and not even hearing it. And you definitely cannot disprove the resurrection. In fact, with all the stuff we talked about, I feel like, how can you not believe this stuff? It takes more faith to be an atheist than a Christian at this point. And one last thing, I'll leave you with this before we do adoration, because you do have to do adoration. Father Lem's give me a look here. I'm sorry, Father. So, okay, perfect. He's like, oh, keep going. The cool thing, most scientists, now, 30, 40 years ago, it was the cool thing to be an atheist and a scientist. For like 100 years, that was the thing. Like, oh, I believe in science, not God. Most scientists in the Western world now, 2/3 of them are firm believers in God, of the new scientists going into the field, because there's so much coming out, like the Shroud, like the image of Guadalupe, like quantum physics. Like, most of these theorists are saying that, like, there's a spiritual world out there that quantum physics is just barely getting to understand, that makes sense of so many of the miracles of the saints that we talk about in the Catholic faith. It's amazing. 2/3 of young scientists are firm believers in God. How amazing is that? Which is way more than before. And by the way, these kids here, that's an amazing testament to what's happening with Gen Z and Gen Alpha. Gen Z, did you know this, is the most religious generation alive? The most religious one. Gen Z has the most Catholics out of any generation in American history and the most believers in God of any alive right now. Amazing. So good things are happening. The revival is starting. And I think all the prayers that you guys have been saying, that I've been saying for years, are starting to kick in. You know, the Lord has heard it. Thanks again, guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Dan Palmieri, for your presentation. We'll just have a few minutes as we continue to set up for our adoration.